I'm Heyoka, and I'm developing a life/school sim action RPG that features multiplayer. Welcome to Patrons, Noctua Academy. It's first devlog, and I've got plenty to share. I began studying game development about 7 months ago back in December. Technically. My first true foray into game development was much earlier in life. I believe I was like around 11 or 12 or so, and I was playing around with Unity 3D. I was trying to make a very over-scoped and highly ambitious mech MMORPG inspired by Titanfall with Unity 3D. Suffice to say, severely overscoped, and I was way too young, but one thing's for certain, I did learn a lot about 3D modeling in that time. Not so much about programming though. Due to the overscoping of that game when I was a kid, I never touched game dev again for a long time, and it's always been a thing I've wanted to return to, but ultimately was not feeling equipped for. In this time, I started developing audio dramas, one for an audio drama series known as Crucible. It got me some experience working with voice actors, and I was really blessed to come across a lot of kindness and talent, and also working on an animated series known as Artifact Escape. But I suffered a little bit from too much perfectionism, and anytime I'd get any animation done, I'd always want to redo it. And, it was just a fun series inspired by both Ruby, if you know of it, and Chaotic, funny enough, if you've ever even heard of that one. Patrons Noctua Academy has many inspirations, but the key one is Ruby. It's an animated series created by Rooster Teeth, made by Montiome. Among the things from Ruby that I really liked and that I want to pull into some level into Patrons is really just the Academy as a whole. More people wanted to see more of the Academy. Just the idea of having a magic/combat academy was a great idea that just was short-lived, to be honest. And I also just really love the idea of students being paired into teams and kind of having to compete with each other while having cooperation. I think it added a lot of layers of camaraderie and just overall enjoyment, as well as just having a favorite team and not just a favorite character. Another inspiration is Persona 4 and 5, particularly because I like their class lecture systems, as well as the fact that they just have so much side stories that you can engage with that you'll never really get to all of them inside one playthrough. It just does not happen, luckily, and I think that's actually a good thing, as well as just it having a lot of life and school simulation elements, the lectures being one, right? As well as it just having this nice comforting atmosphere as well. Next up, I kind of also am inspired by Elden Ring, not for any particular reason other than the fact that I just think they have a very solid combat system. I like the idea of it rewarding timing and spacing. Two things that are just true in almost any type of combat, whether it's like a board game or an action RPG or any kind, and I feel like they add a lot of room for growth for the player to improve and not just their character. Lastly is Cold Steel. It's straight up just a combat academy, and for that reason, it's just a great reference to have. It's not been my favorite game, but it's definitely a solid reference, and I really like the way that they had field studies included and not just in-class studies, and that's something that we're going to have in the form of something called a sojourn, which I'll get into a bit later. So I've told you guys all about Patron Noctua Academy's inspirations and references, but what about the actual game premise and the gameplay? Well, first things first, I kind of want to dive into a couple immersive mechanics first, because I'm pretty excited to tell you about them, and even though they're secondary, and they're not something like as primary as combat, they're still very important to the experience at the end of the day. And the first one being the ranking system. The ranking system keeps track of how well you do combatively and academically, and then generates your pseudo GPA based on the average of those scores. On top of this, it also tracks your team's rating, right, amongst other teams. And the thing that's important about this that players can choose to ignore is that you get more benefits and rewards and currency, like an allowance, for performing better, right? Which means you might not need to take on as many missions to save up and buy a certain kind of weapon and whatnot. But moving on from that is next up the calendar system. It's still in a very basic stage right now, but what's going to be happening is it will allow you to keep track of all your events. My goal as a developer is to add in just enough events that are planned to keep it semi-full, but leave enough freedom for the player to encounter some random events and to also just spark some events. That will be a thing that occurs. Next up is the book system. So for this system, I really want to make sure that reading was actually rewarded and not so tedious. So none of the books are going to have walls of text. They're going to be like 3 to 5 pages long, tops, because I want players to actually want to read it. And on top of this, afterwards, too many games don't reward you for reading at least not even immediately. So in this one, after reading it, you can take an assessment where it's going to kind of quiz you on the book very briefly with like 3-4 questions in a timed manner. And if you get all the questions right, or at least a certain amount right, you get some kind of reward, whether it's a skill, whether it's XP, or something of some nature. And within these books, I fully intend to include information that is unfair and can change how you understand the power system. As you actually pay attention in class, it will teach you how to manipulate the power system in your favor beyond just pointing and clicking all these kind of buttons and all that kind of stuff. That's up to you on whether you want to learn it or not. You could also just act like a flunky. That's a complete thing that I will not punish in the game. Lastly is the sojourn system. I mentioned this earlier, it's akin to field studies. This is when students in their teams go out for a mission, right? They take an aircraft, they leave, and they go into a procedural mission. So right here, right now, I actually just have the procedural mission generation. It currently picks out a random biome. It determines the payout based upon the type of mission you're doing and how hostile it is or difficult, right? It also will tell you, like, obviously where it's located, as I said prior, but it's also going to give you like a mission description so you understand the objective, the potential hazards, and so on and so forth. So I have a very basic description generator right now that will generate dynamic descriptions depending on what the mission has. I'm going to be diving much deeper into this at later points in development, but it's something I'm very excited for. It's like my own form of procedural content. It's procedural quest generation at the end of the day for extra gameplay and variation between your playthroughs. So in terms of Patron's world, it takes place in like this Renaissance medieval fantasy kind of semi-futuristic world. And you know, it's one of those things that I really look forward to kind of showing you guys over time, as this is not something that can easily be shown with just a few assets, because some things will look more modern, some things will look more Renaissance, some things will be a bit more medieval, like in terms of the fact that they still use plenty of melee weapons for various reasons. Alright, so in terms of the power system, because I love power systems, as if you cannot already tell, I like anime. I'm just one of those kind of guys, and I like games. Simple, right? So in terms of power system, I didn't want something simple that a player could fully grasp. I want them to be able to get the basics and then have to learn way more if they want to master it. But mastery is not strictly necessary, though I say all that. So for one, you have patrons and you have radiants. Patrons are these entities that cannot fully enter the world without greatly damaging it, basically. A finger touch from them on the world could damage it to a very large degree. And it could do it in ways that they don't desire, even if they do want some kind of calamity. These entities are almost godlike, but not quite. But they rely on someone, or people, known as Radiants. Radiants are people that patrons can send a certain level of their power through. They're almost like conductors, right? You can't just grab a ball of lightning and hold it somewhere. You need to conduct that electricity through something to efficiently manage it, otherwise you'll short circuit things, right? And that's what the Radiants are. They get the ability to use the patron's authority on the planet, right? And when they do this, this is known as casting their own influence. Their ability to influence and change the world at will. Now, within this system, it is semi-inspired by quite a few other animes and just games that I've consumed over the years, right? And one mechanic, a part of them, is also like domains. Now, that's inspired from Jujutsu Kaisen, however, mine work functionally very different and they're not combative. Like, there's no such thing as a lethal domain in patrons. It's just not a thing that I really wanted. Instead, for me, it's more along the lines of like you're going to someone's kind of requiem. You're going to just their place. I just like the word domain better, and I'm a Jujutsu Kaisen nerd. And you have two types of domains. You have a domain of a patron, which is very hard to get to, and I'm not going to spoil here. And then you have your own domain that you can go to where you can see a physical variation of your patron, where you allow them to enter that place. But there you are the master. They're inside your soul and your mind, right? Alright, so another important thing is ability expression. So obviously your patron that you decide to work with, because it is a choice, they dictate what your abilities are, but that does not mean that they fully control how they manifest. So the same way how conductors can be either greater at conduction or worse at conduction, there's another layer to radiance. They're not just simply conductors, they change how the current runs through them. In other words, they change the way that this ability or authority or influence is expressed. So in other words, you and your friend could end up with the same patron and still ultimately walk very different paths in terms of how those abilities manifest. And that's a very important note. So regarding the academy itself, I want it to be really quaint and old school, but not too archaic, to be completely honest. Overall, the campus will feature quite a few areas, and I'm actually going to be designing it as if I'm actually designing like a functional campus for you guys to fully explore. I want almost every single building to be enterable, right? The campus will feature courtyards, dorms, a market district, a coliseum, an armory, lecture halls, and honestly the list goes on, so I'm not even going to like list all of it, but I want it to be a fully functional and immersive campus. Alright, so you know all about the inspirations and references, you know about Patron's premise and its overall current systems and current development that's already been showcased, but like what comes next? And what comes next is I need to start designing some quality animations for one, because they affect combat to a different kind of degree, because they affect distance management, they affect game feel, and they're overall something that I'll need to change gears to work on because I don't want to do them haphazardly for one. Two, I also need to design more of the game world. I need to do more blocking out in general for the academy and for the demo. Yes, there's a demo, more on that in a bit, and I want to kind of outline the demo experience as well, and eventually start putting out a casting call for some voice actors and actresses. If you're interested in that, there will be a Discord linked below that I'll speak a little bit more on towards the end, but just letting you know about that. Otherwise, I'll just be developing more art assets such as visual effects. I know what my visual effects are supposed to look like, but I need more of them now because it's almost time for abilities, and a lot of them. There needs to be a lot of options, as well as just weaponry, armor, apparel, hairstyles, and so on and so forth, really and truly. But lastly is this demo. I want to release a playtest demo, and I really want to release it sometime in August, ideally, and I'm seeking kind of just feedback in general. I want to hear the opinions and how people feel about it from people interested in this kind of style of game, whether you're in it for action RPG, for Souls-like combat, or just for life or school sim, really and truly. So a couple questions before I close this out, right? I want to know these three things if you're willing. I really do want to hear your opinion. What are your favorite elements of these life/school sim games, truly? And what do you think is just overly neglected when it comes to magic/combat academies, when it comes to like games and media, right? There's not a lot of them, but like, what do you feel like is neglected from them? What do you feel like is missing that you're being cheaped out on? And lastly, do you have any kind of great inspirations for this type of game? Just throw them my way. Even if you have some biased, please, I'm here to hear your bias. Discord server down below. If you want to get access to the demo and know when it's released, just join it. You know, I'm going to try and be chatty in there, and I'm very much so looking for people that are opinionated 100%, so long as you're respectful. And lastly, if you're interested, no pressure, subscribe if you want to see future devlogs and potentially some tutorials down the line. Alright guys, that's Heyoka, and I'm signing off. Thank you for hearing about Patron's Noctua Academy.